I learned that the good thing about solitude is that it reinforces our certainty of being alive. I despised this death because I was being denied a battle. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. As always, today I am talking about The Novices of Lerna by Ángel Bonomini, translated by Jordan Landsman and out now from Transit Books. I'm really excited to talk about this one because Transit Books brought it to my attention. So not only to kind of return the favor of them making me aware of it and sending me a copy, but also because I just love Transit Books. And I'm hoping that especially with Jan Fosse now having won the Nobel and being on their roster of authors, that they continue to get recognition, because along with so many other publishers, they're bringing us so much great world literature in translation for Anglophones like myself. And I'm always excited when I learn of a rediscovered masterpiece of Argentine fantastic literature. And then I see a quote from none other than Adolfo Bioy Casares that says, as if we needed anything more than Argentine literature and Bioy Casares as an endorser, I'm so enthralled by the book that one night when Borges came over, I proposed we read the only story I hadn't read yet. The Novices of Lerna. The Novices of Lerna is the title story and the longest story that fronts a collection of many other stories, by the way. We were dazzled. The story is admirably told with much wisdom. Everything is spot on. So, if you're like me and you saw Argentine literature and an endorsement by Bioy Casares talking about how he and Borges read it together one night and were both dazzled, you can go ahead and stop the video, go get the book, read it, enjoy it, because that's pretty much what I did. But for those of you who want a little bit more, I'm just going to talk about the titular story, The Novices of Lerna. It is roughly, 40 pages? And then there's a whole other helping of stories in this collection that are all fairly short, like 5 to 10 pages. And to be honest with you, personally, The Novices of Lerna isn't even the best in this crop, at least on my first reading through the collection. Nonetheless, it's definitely a masterpiece and a great short story. And I want to use this video to just impart a little bit about why. You can definitely tell that Ángel Bonomini was a contemporary of Silvino Ocampo, Bioy Casares, Borges, and so on and so on. It has that feel to it. It reminds me of when I used to have a subscription way back when to Alfred Hitchcock magazine and Ellery Queen's magazine, these neat little clever mysteries. And it definitely has that feel of what's been collected in a story collection that I have and treasure, and that was compiled and edited by a lot of the names I keep going on about. That would be the Book of Fantasy, a great collection of literature of this ilk, and also The Invention of Morel, and stuff like Borges and the Eternal Orangutans by Luis Fernando Verissimo. I have videos on both of those books, by the way, and others, Borges, Silvino Ocampo included. And I just continue to be surprised at the richness and depth and volume of Argentine literature. Like, what in the world is it down there in Argentina that is making these great writers that we're still finding out about? And so Jordan Landsman has brought this one to us, and it is only the one collection of, I think, 4 collections of short stories that Bonomini has. So I'm very hopeful that this won't be the last translation from the partnership of Transit Books and Jordan Landsman. All right, so the hook that we get in the first few pages is that this sort of uninspired, aimless scholar, Ramon Beltra, gets this really curious invitation to go and basically obtain a sinecure at this university called Lerna in Switzerland. So he's going to leave his native Argentina and go to Switzerland and get paid to do this and get to time to just learn and indulge in scholarly pursuits and the life of the mind. Basically, he gets an offer that he can't refuse. It's like telling a bookworm that, hey, we're going to pay you and cover all your expenses to go for 6 months and read whatever you want and study whatever you want alongside great professors and like-minded people. It's sort of a no-brainer. But of course, as with all great stories of this ilk, all great mysteries, there are some curiosities. They have all this paperwork as part of the application for all these meticulous physical traits and measurements about Beltra. But nonetheless, he's undaunted and goes through with it. He really doesn't have anything to lose, only things to gain. Well, when he gets there, it starts to become clear that there are 24 scholars, 24 applicants there. They call them novices, thus the novices of Lerna. And they all are told to wear the exact same outfit. And furthermore, they all look and sound almost identical to Beltra. So clearly, whatever is going on behind the scenes, this is some kind of crazy experiment in who knows what, some crazy sociological experiment, bringing 24 doppelgangers together and having them all dress alike. And then furthermore, there are all of these rules, and they're informed that there is a sort of project going on of which they're the guinea pigs, but it's non-invasive, non-intrusive for the most part. There are cameras, recordings, and so on. Nonetheless, they continue on with it. They're a little disturbed, but the rewards are greater than the risks and the discomforts. All along the way, Bonomini is doing such a great job at giving us details that really pull us into the story. And these are so crucial in a short story because you've got to give it everything you have. Every detail is crucial because unlike a novel, you don't have the room necessary to really take time and build things up. You've got to really pare this thing down, trim all the fat, and give just the lean meat. And of course, there are things that someone like me, I'm just going to be a sucker for it, such as his office was really a luxuriously furnished library where, despite the large lit fireplace, there floated a delicious perfume of wood and tobacco. It's cliche at this point, you know, the roaring fire and the snifter of brandy and the wall-lined books, book-lined walls. But this mise-en-scène never gets old for me. It gives me the feeling of being amongst kin. Another thing about a book like this, where you're getting pulled into a very interesting situation that is both extremely attractive and alluring, but then also is sending up these red flags, is that along the way, you of course have to be balancing between the red herrings, the flags and details that are leading the reader's mind away from where you want it to go. But then the, white herrings? I don't know. The signposts that are pointing toward where you want the attention not to be drawn. It's the opposite. You want this to be sort of buried underneath the red herrings. So these white herrings, you want to seed in such that they don't attract a lot of the reader's attention, but they stay lodged in that subconscious readerly mind. One such one that I'll give is this. It was as if we were a single person reflected fully in each fragment of a shattered mirror. And as with Borges and all the writers of this ilk, mirrors, circles, all these are used to great thematic effect. And all along the way, we're also being drawn into this character. It is told in the first person, so we're from the perspective of Beltra, and thus Bonomini has the task of making us like this person, but maybe more so identify with this person. So it has to be an everyman. Thus, he has to react in ways that are going to reach the most amount of people, and he has to be someone for whom we're sort of pulling. We don't want anything bad to happen to this person. And so we have to balance in also the details that are going to affect all that for the reader. So we get such things as this. I drank the cognac and retired to my apartment. all the 24 novices stay in their own apartments. And there's all these rules. They get swapped out and switched around all the time so that you can't befriend one of them and form a relationship with them and know that, okay, they're in apartment 12 and I'm in apartment 3. They're going to all get switched around, which further disorients everybody and keeps everything sort of depersonalized. He says, I drank the cognac and retired to my apartment. A human body, tired to the point of exhaustion but well fed, and with a perhaps excessive dose of alcohol, will climb between linen sheets and notice that, despite all its infamies, humanity has had the generosity to create a few small things that are almost sacred. You can't help but love someone who says something like that or professes a sentiment like that. And again, when he starts learning of all of these rules around this mysterious experiment, he says, I processed this information but couldn't help saying that despite being a lawyer, I felt a frank repulsion for any rule I didn't impose upon myself. And then finally, about 3/4 of the way through the story, we get that seed that gets planted in our minds in a story like this that finally changes everything that's going on and imposes danger and risk. One afternoon, in the bar next to the covered swimming pool, I began chatting with one of the fellows. He told me he was interested in literature, and while I don't think crime novels were his specialty, he had envisioned almost every feasible way a murder could occur inside a community like ours, without it being possible to identify the criminal. So at this point, things really ratchet up. And I cannot express to you, without reading the story out loud to you, how well all of this is done. Like every element that makes a story like this stand above the pack. But the other thing that this whole unique and bizarre situation affords is such great and head-turning lines as these. I never knew if I spoke to him again. Annoyed, the rector explained categorically that it should be enough to know that he wasn't the dead man. I'm not sure it's not me, shouted the fellow. I despised this death because I was being denied a battle. And I did not spoil anything because he's not talking about his death in the afterlife. Or is he? The disease was so merciless that even terror felt like a weak response to it. The other interesting element of this story is that Bonomini is clearly not interested in just staying on the simple one-level plane, the monotone drone of one person's perspective. Although it is constrained through one person's perspective, Bonomini is also drawing our attention to how the environment, the situation outside of Beltra's control, interplays with the novices themselves. So in other words, how the environment and the situation, the society, the governance around them changes them, how it changes their behavior. And so as their awareness of what's going on around them, or what's told is going on, to be clear, as that enlightenment happens, their behavior changes. And I think that's one point that makes the story so much more interesting than a lot of mysteries. And so within a mere 4 pages, we go from Beltra saying, I learned to be alone. I learned that the good thing about solitude is that it reinforces our certainty of being alive. But then just a few pages later, although the sensible thing to do was stay apart to avoid the possibility of contagion, the truth is that we were spending more time with each other than ever. So going from learning to be alone and looking at solitude as a way to feel alive, suddenly as the environment changes, now it's the herd mentality and the group instinct that staves off death or not being alive. Fear, of course, along with maybe pain, is one of the greatest factors in depersonalization, which is a big theme in this story. So fear as a great imposition that enforces us to shed our individuality and bear a common humanity. As it says, danger gathers people, brings them together, compels them to live with one another in order to face it. And so we gathered. as if being separated made us more vulnerable. I confess I felt a great need for solitude. I preferred to wait for death alone, and yet I understood that the adult thing to do was not to indulge myself. I had a duty toward the others, to give them my presence. So I think there's a little bit of psychological redirection there. He's trying to stay strong and say, well, I'm only gathering with everybody right now, not because I'm afraid, but because they are and they need my presence. Yet I was thinking about this in contrast to COVID. What was so menacing about COVID, of course, was that in the face of such great fear and danger in that situation, we were forced to stay apart. All right, so then we get to the last 2 pages. And man, when I was down to the last 2 little sections, which is basically 4 paragraphs total, so 2 sections of a couple paragraphs, I noted in that moment, I could feel myself tense with anticipation. I love it when in stories like these, we get to that moment of intensity where, one, we have so many questions. The mysteries still loom large above us. But 2, there's so little story left. We glance over, trying not to read ahead, and we peek on the other side of the page to see if there's any text there before it completely ends. There isn't. So we try not to look at that last sentence. I accidentally see the word and it says the word answers. Now I'm thinking, okay, either it said there are no answers or those are the answers. My mind goes crazy. I don't know if you guys are like that, but I forced myself to then really home in on the words and force myself to slow down, because now at this point, every word of these final paragraphs, they have so much pressure on them for reader expectations. They have so much weight. You're thinking, what's the huge reveal? How is this going to cast a totally different light on everything I've read? Right before we enter that moment of intensity, and just before we get a section break, the Rector, who is our sort of control figure, control character throughout all of this, one of the only characters with whom the novices interact, says every time I had contact with that strange character, he showed a different face, as if all possible human forms were hidden inside of him. And so now, with that and the metaphor of the shards of glass from the mirror reflecting all these different facets of a single human character, my mind is going. And then in the penultimate section, at the very end, it breaks with this Italian record that Beltra has been listening to in his apartment a lot. And there are these 5 voices that all sing in these different modes, but then converge into one voice, and they're singing about being allowed to die. It says the single, as he's walking away, he's leaving now. And it says the single and solitary lover with the 5 different voices begging to be allowed to die. So it just continues pointing now our direction to that theme of the multiple within the singular. I'm not going to read anything from the final 3 paragraphs of the whole story, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you this, though. The big reveal in this story, I believe the big reveal as we've become accustomed to expecting it, is masterfully thwarted here. It's thwarted by something deeper and more complex, so that the novices of Lerna can rise and elevate from mere entertainment to literature. And I promise you that this ending, while not being what our minds may expect, I promise you that it will send you back to the first page to read this thing again. And in that second read, you will welcome Bonomini into your library, into your mind, into your heart. Outstanding work, Jordan Landsman, and thank you, Transit Books, for bringing us bookworms more apples on which to gorge while we drink our mate.